The range was empty when Corporal Nessa Holt arrived at 0430, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She had requisitioned the slot 3 weeks in advance, filling out the paperwork in triplicate the way CFB Wainwright required, and she had done it knowing full well that nobody else would be awake at that hour, nobody else would care, and nobody would see what she was about to do. The targets were set at 800 meters. She moved them herself, sliding the frames out to 1100 in the dark, working by touch and the ambient light of a prairie sky that never quite went fully black in August. She did not tell anyone she had moved them. There was no reason to, at the time. The 2nd Battalion had a sniper cell that functioned the way most sniper cells functioned inside a peacetime garrison, competently, carefully, with a great deal of institutional pride and very little tolerance for disruption. Master Corporal Derek Sauer ran the cell, with the particular authority of a man who had qualified expert marksman 3 years running and intended to qualify again. He was not a bad soldier. He was not a cruel man, exactly. He was simply the kind of person who had organized his identity so thoroughly around a set of skills that any threat to those skills, even a theoretical one, even one wearing a rank lower than his own, registered somewhere deep and unexamined as a threat to his person. Nessa Holt had been attached to the cell for 11 days when Sauer decided she was a problem. She had not done anything dramatic to earn this designation. She had simply, on her 3rd morning at the range, scored a clean group at 900 meters in a crosswind that other shooters were calling unworkable. She had done the ballistic math in her head while everyone else was consulting their data books. She had not mentioned this. She had not looked at anyone while she did it. But Sauer had seen her lips moving and had understood the way skilled people sometimes understand things about other skilled people, that she was running the calculation from memory, and that the calculation was correct, and that she had not needed to write anything down. He filed a range safety concern with Lieutenant Gordy Drummond the following morning. The concern was that Corporal Holt was observed adjusting her firing position without notifying the range officer of record. This was technically accurate. She had shifted her support elbow 2 centimeters to compensate for the angle. Drummond, who was 26 and had been an officer for 14 months and had never fired a shot in a live operational environment, read the concern, initialed it, and forwarded it to the cell's warrant officer without comment. This was how things worked. Nessa had grown up in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, in a house that backed onto a drainage ditch that everyone called the creek, even though it had been dry for 30 years. Her father was a crop insurance adjuster who spent 6 months of every year driving the grids, and her mother taught remedial math at the high school until Nessa was 12 and then didn't teach anything for a while and then taught again. They were not a military family in any formal sense, but her father's youngest brother had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and come back different, not broken, just different. And it was this Uncle Gordy, which was a coincidence she tried not to think about whenever Lieutenant Drummond made a bad decision, who had first put a rifle in her hands. She had been 11. It was a .22. The first shot kicked her right shoulder into her chin because she was holding it wrong, and she had laughed instead of crying. And Gordy had laughed too, and they had spent the rest of the afternoon working out the geometry of her body against the stock until the groups were consistent at 50 meters. And then he had said, "You've got the eye for it." And she had believed him because children believe their uncles, especially uncles who have seen things and come back and can still laugh. She joined at 17 on a recruit program, finished basic with distinction, was routed towards signals because of her math scores, spent 2 years as a communications operator before a range fitness test, put her in front of a warrant officer named LeBlanc, who watched her shoot and filled out a different form entirely. She was 23 when she went through sniper qualification. She was 25 when she was attached to the 2nd Battalion cell and moved her targets to 1100 meters before anyone else arrived. She was 27 now, and Sauer had been filing safety concerns for 16 days. The 4th concern arrived on a Tuesday, which was also the day the external assessment team flew in from Ottawa. The team consisted of 3 warrant officers from the Land Force Doctrine and Training System and 1 civilian contractor who worked for a defense research group at the University of Calgary. The civilian's name was Dr. Fen Ashby, and she was 41 years old and had the particular manner of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms full of people who did not expect her to understand what they were discussing. She understood everything they were discussing. She had published 4 peer-reviewed papers on the terminal ballistics of subsonic projectiles, and 1 book that nobody outside a very specific community had read, but that community had read it carefully and argued about it at length in secure forums that Sauer did not have clearance to access. Ashby arrived at the range during a scheduled qualification shoot. She sat in the observer's position with a clipboard and said nothing for the first 40 minutes. She watched Sauer shoot. She watched 3 other soldiers shoot. Then she watched Nessa Holt move into position at the 900-meter station, and something shifted in her posture, not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the way a person adjusts when something they had been looking for appears. She watched Nessa run the wind flags. She watched her pause. She watched the way Nessa's breathing changed before the shot, slowing in a pattern that was not exactly regulation but was extremely effective, a self-developed rhythm that most shooters arrived at only after years, if they arrived at it at all. The shot broke clean. Ashby wrote something on her clipboard. After the session, she asked Drummond if she could review the cell's range logs for the past 30 days. Drummond said yes because she had the authority to ask, and he did not have the seniority to decline. The logs arrived in a binder that evening. Ashby read them in her quarters at the base accommodations, sitting on the bed with the binder on her knees, and found the safety concerns filed against Corporal Holt, 4 of them, all from the same source, and spent a while reading them very carefully. She found no safety violations. She found, instead, a precise record of every time Nessa Holt had done something that Sauer could not do, and had dressed that fact in the language of procedure. The next morning, Ashby requested a private range session with Corporal Holt. Sauer was informed through proper channels. He arrived anyway. He stood at the range margin with his arms crossed and his expression arranged into something that was not quite hostility and not quite concern, and was in practice both. Drummond was beside him, looking uncertain, which was his most natural expression. Ashby set up at the observer's position and told Nessa what she wanted. Specific conditions: crosswind at 15 kilometers per hour, simulated based on the flags and the reported forecast. Target at 1,100 meters. Data book use permitted. Nessa said nothing. She went prone. She opened her data book, found the page, and turned it face down on the mat. Sauer made a small sound. It was quiet, but Ashby heard it. The calculation Nessa ran in the next 45 seconds was not complicated for her, because she had been running versions of it since she was 11 years old on a frozen drainage ditch outside Moose Jaw, because her brain organized ballistic variables the way other people organize grocery lists, because the numbers had a texture and a weight that she had learned to feel rather than see. Spindrift, Coriolis, density, altitude, wind. She had run this particular combination dozens of times in the past weeks at this exact range, and she had the answer before Drummond had finished noting the time in his log. She adjusted, she breathed, she fired. The hit was confirmed at 1,120 meters. She had compensated for the flag shift without verbal indication. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Sauer said, "She moved the targets." Ashby turned and looked at him. "Before the session started," he said, "I saw the calibration markers. They've been adjusted." "I adjusted them," Nessa said. She did not look up from her data book, which she had flipped back over and was now writing in. "I logged it with the range officer." "You logged it with Corporal Whitson," she said. 0628 this morning. It's in the daily sheet." Drummond went to check. He came back 2 minutes later and confirmed this was accurate, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had been hoping for a different answer and had not received it. "The concern," Ashby said to Sauer, quietly, the way a person speaks when they want the words to land exactly right, "is that the target was moved too far." He did not answer. "Is that the concern?" "Range safety," he said finally. "Standard procedure exists for a reason. The standard," Ashby said, "assumes an 1,100-meter shot is non-standard." She made a note on her clipboard. "I'm going to recommend she come to Ottawa for 2 weeks." This was the first Nessa had heard of Ottawa. She looked up. There's a long-range evaluation program, Ashby continued, speaking to Drummond now, because he was the authority of record, run out of DRDC Suffield. We've been looking for qualified personnel to test a new calculation methodology for extreme range engagements. I've been watching 3 ranges in the past month. She paused. This is the first time I've needed to flip my clipboard over to the notes section. Drummond nodded carefully, in the way of a man taking on information he did not fully understand. Sauer did not nod. That evening, Nessa sat in the mess with a cup of coffee she was not drinking and looked out the window at the prairie, which was doing what the prairie did in August, which was being large and calm and completely indifferent to anything happening at human scale. She had been at Wainwright for 6 months. She had requested the posting because the range conditions were good, not because she expected anything particular to happen, because she had learned some time ago that expecting things to happen was a way of being wrong on a regular schedule. She thought about the morning's shoot. She thought about the way Ashby had held very still when she fired, the way you hold still when you don't want to break something. She thought about Uncle Gordy, who was living in Kelowna now, who called on her birthday and always asked if she was getting enough range time, as though this were the central question of a life. She thought maybe it was, for her. Maybe that was not a small thing. The Ottawa evaluation was 12 days long, not 2 weeks. This was because, on the 3rd day, they asked her to shoot at 1,600 meters under conditions that were described as experimental, meaning nobody in the room had solid data on what the projectile would do at that range under those atmospheric variables. And she asked for 20 minutes with the environmental sensor data, and they gave her 30. And at the end of it, she wrote 4 numbers on a notepad and handed it to Ashby's colleague, a tall, quiet warrant officer named St. Pierre, who looked at the numbers and then at her and then at the numbers again. The shot was within acceptable parameters. St. Pierre showed the data to his supervisor. His supervisor showed it to someone else. By the end of the week, there were 7 people in the room instead of 3, and one of them was a colonel from a directorate that Nessa did not have full clarity on, and he had flown in from somewhere that was not Ottawa. She did not ask questions. She was not a person who asked questions in rooms that had recently acquired colonels. She shot when they asked her to shoot, and she ran the math when they asked her to run it, and she wrote things down when they asked her to write things down. And she slept 8 hours every night because that was part of the process, the physical discipline of rest, which her body understood even when her mind was restless. On the 10th day, the colonel sat across a table from her and asked what she thought of the methodology they'd been developing. She told him honestly. There were 3 assumptions in the atmospheric modeling that didn't hold at extreme altitude, and the correction factor being used for Coriolis acceleration was slightly off for northern latitudes. This mattered less in theory than it did in practice, because at the ranges they were discussing, slightly off was the difference between a confirmed hit and a report that said probable effect. He was quiet for a moment. "You wrote this down?" he said, in the debrief notes, day 6. He looked at the file in front of him. "Turn to day 6, read for a while." "Who did you study under?" he said. "I qualified through Standard Sniper School," she said. "I read a lot." "What do you read?" She listed several papers. One of them was Ashby's book. He closed the file. He asked if she had family commitments that would make a temporary reassignment difficult. She thought about the drainage ditch, about Moose Jaw, about her father driving the grids, her mother teaching math to kids who found it hard, about how both of them had given her the particular gift of understanding that difficult things were worth doing carefully, that patience was not the same as passivity, that the distance between where you are and where the target is simply a problem, and problems have solutions, and solutions require time. "No," she said. "No family commitments." "Good," he said. She went back to Wange when she arrived. He did not speak to her. He watched her load her bags into the vehicle, with the particular expression of a man who has realized too late that the thing he was trying to prevent has already happened, and that his efforts to prevent it are now, in retrospect, a record of his own limitations. She did not look at him while she worked. Not out of coldness, exactly. She was not a cold person, but because there was nothing useful to be said, and she had learned, Slowly, across the years and the ranges in the early mornings, that silence in the right moment is not absence. It is a kind of answer. The vehicle pulled onto the grid road and headed west, toward the highway that would take her north to Edmonton, and then to a flight, and then to whatever came next. The prairie was still large. It was still indifferent. She looked at it through the window and found for the first time in 6 months that she was not thinking about the targets. She was thinking about the calculations she hadn't written down. The ones she'd kept only in her head, carried around the range like something private, something that didn't need to be proven because she already knew it was right. She was thinking that maybe she had known it was right all along. That was the thing about working at a distance. The variables were real. The physics was real. The wind was real. And the answer, if you had the patience to find it, if you had spent enough mornings in the cold doing the work before anyone else arrived, the answer was real too. It didn't need someone else to confirm it. It had always been real.